Okay, so this is sort of weird, but we're actually starting the next unit today.
No.
Let me explain.
No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. Just because
The reason we're doing this is because we finished the previous unit. I decided to end it there. When you come back from Thanksgiving break, you actually have the option on that Monday of studying and just getting ready, or you can start the Blue Book exam the Monday you get back. But I totally get if you do not want to do that. That would require you to spend your Thanksgiving break, which I want you to treat as a break, a true break. That's why I'm having it so that you should be in good shape as far as your Blue Book essay is concerned. Around now, you should be in good shape. But if you want, fine. You can attack the Blue Book essay on the Monday you get back. But then you've got 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, of the week after Thanksgiving break to attack the second unit exam. And then that following Monday, we start Unit 3, which is really about sectionalism and the Civil War and all that fun stuff. It's awesome. But I want to start it now so that the Monday we come back, we actually attack that slavery article from Genovese. That's what I want to do. I want to get you in good shape as far as the writing of your second paper. It won't take long, I promise.
Wait, so this is Unit 3.
This is Unit 3.
Okay.
I'm sorry if this upsets those of you who are like ooper duper super organized and this is upsetting. Sorry.
Not okay about it.
I am now identifying various economic groups that existed in the South. The theme of this unit is sectionalism. Sectionalism is the identifying of one as a member of a part of the nation rather than the nation. You've heard, those of you who pay attention currently, you've heard Trump say that he is an avowed nationalist. America first. People at this time were avowed sectionalists. They identified with their section of the nation rather than the nation itself. And specifically, we're now looking at how did the Southern population break down? And they go in order from very few but a whole lot of power to a lot but hardly any power. Hey, have we looked at that sort of situation before?
Yeah.
We have.
Of course.
I suppose that's true. I was referring to European feudalism, right? The very few at the top that had all the power, and then all the way down to the peasants and the serfs, who there were a lot of them, but they had hardly any power. Okay. Well, at the very, very top this is mislabeled. This should say plantation owners. Plantation owners. These are the people that own the huge slave plantations. They dressed in all white. They sat on the front porch. They drank their tea, and they called the dog Belvedere. Belvedere, come here, boy. And now Belvedere is on the front porch. Meanwhile, the slaves are out in the fields singing gospel songs, saying, "Thank you, Massa. Oh, thank you, Massa. This sure is great." And what are they doing? They're picking cotton. The typical, stereotypic image of the South. The slaves in the fields picking cotton, singing hymnals. Meanwhile, the slave owner is on the front porch petting Belvedere. And there were hardly any of them. Something like 2% of the total Southern population was that situation. They very wealthy, and they owned a bunch of slaves. It was a corporate relationship. The owner didn't know the names of the slaves. The owner of 3M does not know the employees of 3M. There's too many of them. There's no way. That's the relationship here. kind of interesting is the breakdown of labor. If you were a slave on one of these plantations, you know who your boss probably was?
Another slave.
Another slave. That's right. Anyone know the term for those people? The bosses of the slaves that were bosses of slaves. They were called slave drivers. The slave drivers. Synthesis time. They did the same thing in the Jewish ghettos. When the Germans would take over areas where there was a Jewish neighborhood, they would break you down, and then they'd find certain Jews, and they'd make them feel big and important by saying, we're putting you in charge of making sure the neighborhood is in order, is in control. And spying on your own people happened. Same thing here. Okay. One thing we'll discover is Hitler was a very good American history student. He really was. Okay. Okay. Any questions there?
No.
Underneath them are what we'll call small slave owners. I don't mean small slaves as in the slaves they owned were tiny. I mean they didn't own very many. Yes, dear.
What did you say was another name for the just regular slaves?
Slave drivers? Or for the regular slaves?
No,
Slaves.
no, the slave owners, like
Plantation owners. Plantation owners. Yep. Small slave owners, they owned 2, maybe 3. And they knew them. They knew them by name because they worked right onside them. They did the same labor as the slave.
They just needed help.
They needed help. You got it. Can you imagine? Which situation do you suppose corporal punishment was more common in? The first one, absolutely. Whippings and even executions, which weren't encouraged, by the way. This guy, at least in his own mind, was probably friends with the slaves in his mind. There was probably a good relationship there. You have to remember that a good young male slave at this time cost about, in today's dollars, about 30 grand. Who can afford 25 cars? Really rich people can. Who can afford 25 slaves? Really, really rich people can. Now, think about your own family. Does your family own a car? 2, maybe 3? Okay. There you go. If you own a car, you own probably a couple. Same thing. If you own slaves, you probably owned 2, maybe 3. Okay. Where do you think breeding was more common? Definitely the top one. It was a corporate business. Incorporated rape is what we could call it. Now, did this small slave owner, did he rape the female slave? Very good chance that absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Okay, but it wasn't necessarily breeding like it was in the top situation. Okay. As I'm introducing a group called Flatland Whites, I will get across to you, I hope, a point, and that is this. Most Southerners did not own slaves. Did not. If you owned slaves, you maybe owned 2, maybe 3, but most did not. Couldn't afford it. It's too expensive. Flatland whites. Today we'd call these people poor white trash. Think about that image that you have in your mind. What does that person look like? What does that person drive? What kind of pet does that person have? How many guns does that person own? How many Confederate flags does that person own? You understand. Okay? These people live in the Appalachian Mountains. They're poor. They're illiterate. And in their mind, the competition is slaves in the pecking order. You know what I mean? The pecking order of society. They're down here, but at least they're above slaves. And the wealthy would exploit that breach. economically, you could argue that why didn't these people ally themselves with the slaves? They're sort of in the same economic sphere, right? They're both poor. They both depend on others for their well-being. There seems to be a natural alliance here. But these people made sure that did not happen. They made slavery a race issue rather than an economic. Okay. Questions so far? Let's keep going. The people that live in the mountains, the mountain whites. We could call these people West Virginians. Coal country. Not too many slaves over there in the western part of Virginia. And that is why, interesting little footnote, when Virginia seceded, 12 counties in western Virginia seceded from Virginia because secession was not legal in their minds. And you might think, but what? If secession's not legal, how did they secede? What they actually claimed was they didn't secede when Virginia seceded. So Virginia seceded illegally, but they didn't. So they remained loyal to the Union. That became the state of West Virginia. Wisconsin is actually an older state than West Virginia. Because West Virginia was made into a state right in the middle of the Civil War. Okay, so they are loyal to the Union. They did not own slaves. That doesn't mean they believe in the power of the federal government. They still believe in this thing called states' rights, but they're not on board with the idea of slavery. And then finally, free blacks that lived in the South. Yes, there were some blacks that were not slaves who stayed in the South. And you might think, why? Do you know how many people out there in the rest of the world look at us and say, why do you live there? I mean, here. Why do we live here? Very cold climate, right? Only 3% of the world's population lives in a colder climate than you and I do. Why do we live here? Family. The summers are nice. Culture. Okay. No hurricanes or earthquakes. Okay.
We have no real natural disasters.
Well, I don't know. Tornadoes are nasty.
We don't get
Historians estimate that number was around 250,000. In the Deep South, they were referred to as mulatto. That's a term that has sort of gone away. And they certainly weren't equal. If you were a free black, you were certainly continue to be a secondary importance. You did not have rights. You were not able to testify in court. You were not able to own weaponry. Even if you weren't a slave, it didn't matter. And that number 4, sometimes forced back into slavery. And I would put the word back in quotes. Sometimes they're forced back into slavery. What I'm suggesting to you is, can you imagine anything worse than this? That you're just living in, I don't know, somewhere, Tennessee, whatever, and some white guy comes up and says, hey, whoa, that's my slave right there. I owned him. He escaped. And you're like, no, I didn't. I've been living here all my life. Well, who's the cop going to believe? Yes, dear. Sometimes forced back into slavery. That's what we're talking about right now. Move. Also, these notes are available to you online. Okay. But I'll read it. 250,000 number in the Deep South. They're referred to as mulatto. They did not have rights, including unable to testify in court. There were other things that they could not do, own weapons, et cetera. And sometimes forced into slavery. What's not even up here is slaves themselves. That's underneath all this. Okay. Questions? I'm advancing now. Yes, dear. I don't know. I wasted paper. Very good. Okay. So let's take a look at specifically this group right here, the situation of it. So I'm identifying characteristics. In the South, by 1860, estimates were that there were about 4 million slaves. That's a significant population. And to the whites of the South, that's scary. That's a potential army if we allow it to happen. So we're going to make sure we don't allow that to happen. What this bullet says is that the slave trade existed until 1828. Does anyone remember why that year? I'd be impressed. It would require you to do something. Remember. Yes.
They couldn't put anything to slavery for 20 years.
Very good. Remember, there was a previous compromise where they said they had to leave slavery alone for 20 years. And it lasted 20 years. I mean, to the day when that little agreement expired, the next day, Northern senators passed a bill saying no more slave trade. Notice it says no more slave trade. Slavery can exist, but no more importation from Africa. That's the slave trade. Okay. How were slaves treated? Let me ask this question. What's wrong with slavery? I challenge you right now, right here, to a debate. You are a Northern capitalist. I am a Southern slave owner. Let's roll. I think my system is better than yours. Prove me wrong. What's wrong with slavery? What's wrong with it? Or have I convinced you already?
You're saying that another human being is worth less than yourself is not morally correct.
Well, I think you Northern capitalists treat your people worse than I treat my slaves.
How so?
Who is the hypocrite here? The Northern capitalist who pays their employees as little as possible, because that's what you do. You pay them as little as possible. And with that meager income, that immigrant has to pay for his own food, clothing, and shelter. And if that immigrant is injured on the job, you Northerners fire them. You know what I do to my slaves? I feed them, I clothe them, I house them, and when they're injured, I nurse them back to health. Hypocrite. Hypocrite. Do I pay them in money? No. But I pay them. I certainly do pay them. Yes.
You didn't exactly ask them if they wanted to be a slave, though.
I'm sure your Northern factory workers love it. Oh, this is awesome, as they spend 14 hours in some god-awful hot factory room sewing all day.
Kind of took the slaves under their own will, so
You separated them
They
from their
chose it.
families.
Because it's better than a different scenario that they were
Okay,
taking from.
so now you're getting somewhere, all right? There is a matter of choice here. If you Northern immigrants didn't like it, you could always move out west if you wanted to. Not a choice available to Southern slaves. But how many of you, while we were having this little exchange, thought, yeah, Potsy has a point there. Because I'm telling you, that's what Southern slave owners believed. They believed that their system was more humane than Northern cutthroat capitalism. And you bring in all these immigrants that speak these funny languages and you pay them as little as possible. And when they are injured on the job, you fire them. I buy slaves and I take care of them. No one buys a new Corvette and then beats the crap out of it. Well, somebody probably does. But what you're doing is you're buying a used car and then beating the snot out of it and then just buying a replacement next year. I am buying a Corvette and I wipe it down with a diaper every day. I'm like the dad on Ferris Bueller, you know, the one that they took his car, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
No one drives it. Okay. So to this question, treatment of slaves. Were some slaves beaten? Yes. Were some slaves hunted down? Yes. But it's rarer than you think. Slaves were taken care of. They were expensive. So we're gonna treat it like a good cow. All right. The number of slaves you owned was a measure of your wealth. A sort of like, big house, big yacht. He's wealthy. If I own more slaves than you, I am more important than you in Southern society. In some areas, there were more slaves than whites. South Carolina, for example. There were more slaves than whites. And so we're going to bring up slave rebellions here in just a second. There was breeding, not too much breeding in northern factories. No one brought that one up. There was rape, right? You're my property. You are my property. And so I'm not ready to say that they had the legal right to rape, but who are you going to report it to? If you are a Southern slave female and you've just been raped by your owner, to whom do you go to complain? Good luck, man. There's no one there to receive that message. Sorry? Zero consequences. Yep, exactly. Have any of you read Uncle Tom's Cabin?
No.
I have read Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's awful.
Sounds creepy.
It is a terrible book. It's poorly written. It's so over the top that you read it like, no, this would not happen. And that is the reason why you do not study this book in your literature classes. It's an awful book, but it is a historically important book. And that's why we study it in history class. It was written by a woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe, S-T-O-W-E, Stowe. And she was an abolitionist. Anyone know what that means? Why? What's wrong with slavery? She was against slavery for specific reasons, though. Moral. It's evil. It is unchristian to own another human being. So she writes this book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and the main character is Tom, a slave. And in this book, I'm sorry, I'm going to spoil it. Don't read it. It's awful. He dies. And I'm telling you that the death starts on some page, and 10 pages later, you will be thinking, just die already and suffer while you're at it. I mean, he's like, oh, I'm dying, help me, die. But it's an important book because in the book, the slaves are beaten to within an inch of their life. They're raped. They're bought and sold. Now, did these things happen? Yeah. I'm trying to get across less than they think, but still. The worst of slavery is presented. And Northerners bought it. It was the bestseller. In fact, I believe this is right. I'm not 100% sure about this. You can back me up here. I believe it was the first book to replace the Bible as the bestseller for whatever year. It's the first time the Bible wasn't the bestseller. I might be wrong there, but it's something. Northerners believed every word. Southerners said, what a bunch of crap. This isn't true. None of this is true. But do you see? How can I base my prediction of how you felt about this book? If I were a neutral observer and I came to you and said, oh, did you read Uncle Tom's Cabin? And you said, yeah. How would I know how you felt about it? All I need to know is I need to just know one thing, and I can accurately predict how you felt about it. Very good. Where are you from? If you're from the north, loved it. Every word's true. If you're from the south, what a pile. In fact, some southern writers wrote their own book, Aunt Petunia's Cabin. And in Aunt Petunia's Cabin, all the slaves are singing love songs, and it's great. And Southerners believed every word, and Northerners said, what a bunch of crap, right? Fake news. This is your original fake news. Well, Boston Massacre might be a little bit older. Okay. It's an important book, though. That's why it's studied in this class. Northerners bought it, believed it. Slavery's the worst. Southerners hated it. How can you Northerners like this? It's what a bunch of lies, right? Okay. Last slide. I really want you to try and drink this picture in. Whoa. Okay. It's awesome. If you're wondering what you're looking at, that's basically Black Hulk. And that's some poor kid's head because Black Hulk chopped it off with that serious looking axe. Black Hulk was a guy by the name of Nat Turner. Nat Turner did not look like that. But like Uncle Tom's Cabin, what you have is media twisting the truth. This is the 1831 version of the Boston Massacre. The same thing is going on. The person who made this wants you to think a certain way about Nat Turner. That he's going to kill your children. This is you. Very good, right? It could happen to you if you let the Nat Turners of the world go. In 1831, there was a guy named Nat Turner. He was a preacher. He would give sermons on Sundays, attended by slaves where he was a slave, attended by the slave owners. The white family would go and listen to this guy. Neighboring slaves were invited to come. Neighboring slave owners were invited to come and listen to this guy. He's a man of God.
He was a slave.
He was a slave, but he started preaching that he started getting messages from God and that slavery was a sin and needed to be ended, and he did start a rebellion. That is true. In South Carolina, where slaves outnumbered whites. And I don't know what number it is. It's something like 60-ish people ended up dying from the rebellion. But they were all rounded up by the authorities, and it says there 15 were executed, including Nat Turner himself. But the real importance is after. If you're South Carolina, you've just seen firsthand what could happen if you let these slaves rise up. So the important thing is what South Carolina does after the rebellion. The rebellion's important, but it's what happens after. Okay? Don't worry about that just now. Here are the results. The results of Nat Turner's rebellion. South Carolina passes a series of laws called the Slave Codes. It became illegal to let your slave read or write. It became illegal to let your slave roam. If you own that slave, he stays where he is. Stop letting him roam. We're going to start treating these slaves like criminals. That second bullet is a big idea. Like it or not, slavery is legal. In southern states, it's legal. But you have Harriet and Beecher Stowe writing a book criticizing it. You have Nat Turner's Rebellion, which, by the way, Northerners praised. And Southerners are looking at Harriet Beecher Stowe and the reaction to her, and Nat Turner's Rebellion and the reaction to him, and saying, what is wrong with you Northerners? You might not like it, but it's legal. It's legal. Why isn't our federal government, which is supposed to represent all of us, protecting this legal practice? Might not like it, but it's legal. Okay. We'll talk about John Brown later. That's it. I'm done. Okay.
We had one mom. Exactly.
You're welcome.
Yay.
Yay.
How many of you need the fourth paragraph sample of the Amante Pepper pretend paper, which you should use as a guide for the writing of paragraph number 4?
Wow. That was a lot of notes.
More for me to catch up on.
Yes.
I'm doing another break.
What's the point?
Whatever.
Whoa. We're done with unit 2.
Wait, that's unit 2.
We're in unit 3 now, so like we have our test.
Find all the notes you're
Look,
taking
this
since the 19th.
is the
That's what you
18th.
want.
This is the 19th. So
That's
what's
the
the first
19th.
thing I thought of October?
Just like AirPods.
This is one good one. It's for Secret Santa.
Oh.
See, this just popped up on my
Rest of the
memories.
hour, about 20 minutes,
And back.
is you
No, go back.
maybe
Why are
writing
you showing me
your
this?
fourth paragraph, maybe finding your quote, and a reminder, your quote
18.
that you have to find is supposed to be from a historian about the issue itself or a quote about a synthesis topic. Closely related, but from another era. Yes, dear. 1 total.
And I was like, Mom, like, okay, that's not.
Hey, don't just go to Google and type Sedition Act and then find the Wikipedia comment about it. But by the way, let me help you there. The real strength of Wikipedia is that fabulous footnote thing at the end, right? It'll make all these comments and there'll be little numbers. Go to that little number. That'll take you to the document that the writer for the Wikipedia article used in the writing of the Wikipedia article. Go to that original document. That you could use. That's the best thing about Wikipedia. It's an amazing footnote exercise. Okay? Please let me know if you have any questions, but you have the rest of the hour. Are you glad that I'm not talking anymore?
Oh my god, I was probably standing right in front of that. Yeah, it's like right here.
The whole time?